Hey, welcome to the Lead Well Podcast. This is Stephen Owens. I'm your host at the Lead Well Podcast. And listen, we have a great episode lined up for you today. We have Dr. Charles Stone, a pastor, author, conference speaker. My man is going to bless us today. But before we get into the podcast, just want to let you know who we are at the Lead Well Podcast, just in case you're new to us. What we do is we go and interview leaders from around the world to get their wisdom and leadership insight so that we can be able to bring that back to the leadership community here at Lead Well so that we can become better leaders for the glory of Jesus Christ. And if you want to stay connected with us, I would encourage you to go over to my website at stephenowens.org and sign up for our free newsletter where you'll be able to receive a free download that I wrote, a book called Rescuing Ambition. It's the ebook. I believe it'll bless your life. And then finally, before we jump into the episode, if we have been an encouragement to you over here at the podcast, and you want to also encourage leaders with us, I would ask you to partner with us here at Lead Well Podcast so that we can be a blessing to leaders, so that we can encourage more leaders around the world to be able to become better leaders for the glory of Jesus Christ. All right. Well, thanks so much, and let's jump into the episode. All right. See you soon. Hey, Brother Charles, thanks so much for coming on to the podcast. I really appreciate it.
Great to be with you, Stephen.
Yeah, so you got a lot going on, brother. You're a pastor up in London, Ontario, in Canada, church strategist and conference speaker, prolific author. Man, how do you do it all?
Well, you're too kind. I tell you what, it's just time management. I really spend a lot of time managing my schedule and set aside time to do that. And sometimes I get everything in, and sometimes I don't.
I get it. It can be very difficult trying to juggle everything. And
yeah.
So you got what, 4 books and then one coming out. Tell us a little bit about the book you got coming out.
Yep. It's called Every Pastor's First 180 Days, How to Start and Stay Strong in a New Church Job. And basically, it covers the concept of onboarding. Onboarding is what do you do in the first few weeks, first few months in a new job. There's a lot of stuff out there for business people, but very little for pastors. Like when I was in seminary, it's like, what do? You go preach the word of God. You visit people in hospitals.
Right.
And it's a whole lot more than that. So the book really is a very practical tool to help pastors, and there's also kind of a bunch of freebies. And in the book, there's a link where they can go online and get like 25 different tools to help them in the process. So, yep, just came out.
Well, that's exciting. So I'm looking forward to reading it and getting all the good nuggets. Even though I'm 5 years in at Mount Calvary, I know it can still help me in my career. You know.
Sure, you bet.
All right, so let's talk a little bit about leadership. Why do you think leadership is so important?
Well, I think John Maxwell said that every organization, the lid is the leader. I think he's really, really correct about that. Leadership is, obviously one of the spiritual gifts. Leadership is a responsibility. All of us are leaders in some way, where we self-lead ourselves, we lead, families, we lead organizations. If we're pastors, we lead our ministries, we lead our churches. And Proverbs says, where there is no vision, the people perish. And so I believe one of the key roles of a leader is to be able to discern, probably collaboratively with other leaders, what is God's vision, lead the accomplishment of that, keep an eye on the ball to make sure that execution happens. So I just don't really think that a church is going to be prevailing and going to be everything God wants it to be unless you have a good leader and good leaders, and I think a good leadership culture where you're developing new leaders along the way.
That's good. That's good. So talk a little bit about discerning, right? Because I think a lot of times that's some of the things that we miss, especially in spiritual leadership. right? When we think about as pastors, we try to read a lot of books like, Maxwell and
Yeah.
Good to Great and things like that. And some of those things are very good because they transfer over. Organization is organization,
Yeah.
but discerning, you don't hear too many leaders talking about that. So
Yeah.
what is that? Give us some insight.
Yeah, well, I think discernment certainly is for every believer, just to be discerning the fundamentally between right and wrong. But there's a lot of gray when you lead. Like, what is your particular vision? Obviously, Great Commission. What is your
Mhm.
vision for your church? So there is a discernment process, I think, to really leverage leadership to the maximum. Now, early on in ministry, it was kind of like the Moses thing: go on Mount Sinai, go away for a weekend, you come back, and here's the vision.
Mm-hmm.
Now, I won't discount the fact that that could be, God can speak in those kind of ways. But one of the best advice that was ever given to me when I came to Canada six years ago, I went to a breakfast the first week. One of our board members took me to a breakfast, and there were some other business people, and there were some pastors there. Met a pastor who's a Canadian. I said, I'm new here to Canada. I've been pastor for several years. What do you recommend that I do to, be most successful in God's eyes? He said, well, here's the number one thing I recommend is be collaborative in your leadership. Because in some places in the U.S., there's this culture like the top down. Here's the general determines what you're supposed to do, and you obey me. And I'm oversimplifying here.
Mm-hmm.
But he gave me some great advice in working with in a collaborative way with our board, with our staff. And I think discernment happens in a collaborative process. It's not that you're passive and you're waiting for somebody else to tell you what to do. But I think discernment, really strong discernment, comes through obviously prayer and trusting the Lord, but also the wisdom of many others. So I think that's an important aspect of discernment, this collaborative piece.
Gotcha. Well, I do think it's a biblical principle too, right? How we are one body, right? Many members,
Right.
one body coming together.
Yeah.
Okay. But using that also in the leadership structure of the church and in casting vision. That's awesome. So tell us a little bit about your leadership journey. What has that looked like?
I wish I could say that it started out well, but my seminary training did not. I think there was maybe one course like on spiritual formation, maybe a little bit of leadership. There was nothing outside of that, nothing on what it really means to be a leader. Now, you talked about here's how you baptize, here's how you visit hospitals, those kind of things, and I'm not discounting the importance of those. Never was taught leadership. So it was kind of trial and error. I was like, unfortunately, I found myself kind of like too bossy than I should have been, defensive if people disagreed with me. I thought that if I came up with the idea, everybody should understand it and embrace it. So my leadership was a rocky start, and I learned, unfortunately, the hard way. But then, slowly but surely, God began to put some, conferences in my way. Began to put some books in my pathway, and so I began to learn to lead better. Now, after almost 40 years in ministry, I've got this cumulative amount of wisdom, some from book learning, some from conferences, some from hard knocks, and putting all those together, I feel like that I probably understand more about leadership than I ever have. I'm practicing in a better way, but I'm still a learner. I'm almost 65, but I'm going to continue to learn and read. And as a leader, we must never stop learning.
That's good. And so I see too, right? Because I was checking out your bio, and so you were trained as an engineer as well, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then did some MDiv classes and
Yep.
doctoral work.
Mm-hmm.
So what has that education process been able to add to your leadership?
Mm-hmm. Well, I was when I went to seminary, I was at a disadvantage. A lot of these guys in seminary, like they'd done like summer trips and evangelism trips, or they'd been youth pastors. I taught a youth Sunday school class. That was it. However, the engineering degree is industrial and systems engineering, basically how things fit together. It has been invaluable in helping me develop and manage systems in a church, because there are systems. There's a communication system, there is a discipleship system, there's a stewardship system. So that was, and it wasn't intentional, like I'm going to go to seminary, then I'm going to be a pastor. it's been a tremendous help for me in understanding some of the mechanics of kind of management leadership. Of course, my MDiv was very helpful in helping me with the theological piece. The doctor of ministry was kind of it was more practical, so I learned some more practical things. And my undergrad degree, engineering, oh, it was a great degree to have going into ministry.
Okay. So I think one of the things that was missing in the beginning portion of my ministry and on my leadership journey was understanding systems, right, and how they played in the church. I mean, you thought, what I thought was preaching, right, Sunday school teaching, baptism,
Yep.
And let's try not to make people mad.
Yeah, right.
That was my thought of church, going into leadership and into ministry. So why do you think systems are important in church? And just give maybe some helpful suggestions on maybe even thinking through some of them and how to create them.
Yeah. Well, I look at systems kind of like the skeleton of the body. You could have someone who's handsome, a woman who is beautiful, they're strong, they're lean, mean, all that sort of thing. But without this internal structure of skeleton, they'd just be just amorphous mass. So systems provide some internal structure that every church needs. Yes, you need a good preaching. But pastors need to have systems in developing their sermons. So that's not like Saturday morning, oh, what am I going to preach on tomorrow? If you have systems, what you do, you're planning how you're going to draw your materials together, when you're going to study, when you're going to practice your sermon. And if you have a system and you build it into your schedule, I believe a pastor is going to be much better, more effective in his preaching. There's going to be less stress on that last minute sort of thing. So that's just one practical thing. What is your system for preparing your sermons? Another system that I think a lot of churches miss is strategic stewardship. What is your system to encourage people to give? If it's just the once a year you do your 2 or 3 part series on preaching on giving, that's only part of it. That should be part of the system. How do you communicate needs? How do you build into your schedule your budgetary plan, but also your communication on your budget needs? How do you communicate and capture those end of the year times like Christmas when people naturally give? And all of that, a system for lifting stewardship, the net result will be people will find greater joy in their giving. Giving will increase. And of course, every church, resources are needed to be a prevailing church. So just a couple of systems: preaching, planning system, and strategic stewardship system. Those are really, really crucial to build into your home ministry.
Amen. And definitely that's something that I hear a lot about speaking with pastors, right? Giving and being stressed out because trying to figure out when I'm going to preach on Sunday, right?
Yeah.
And so let's talk a little bit more then about some practical things when it comes to leadership. What are some of the things that you see, some common areas when it comes to leadership, whether it's in the church or even in the marketplace, that the leaders are kind of stumbling over?
Yeah. Well, I can tell you one of the things that I stumbled over is when I came up with an idea or a plan and called my leaders together. I'd be all excited because I'd been in that world for maybe weeks, massaging the idea, thinking about the idea, gathering materials, reading books. I had this great idea. So I come with enthusiasm and I come with excitement and I share the people around the table and they're silent. I think, they get it. They love it. But the reality is they don't get it because they just heard about it and they don't want to offend you by asking those questions. So I think some pastors and leaders in the marketplace as well, we miss creating an atmosphere to receive honest feedback. And if we don't receive honest feedback from those we lead, we're going to miss some blind spots because we don't know what we don't know. Now, I don't mean someone who's just a constant critic. That's a different story. That's a different issue. But I think one of the things we stumble over is assuming people get our ideas. And because we've not built an atmosphere, a welcoming atmosphere, really tell me what you think. We actually find out 6 months later, oh, you really weren't behind this. You really didn't understand it. So that's one thing. Another piece too, when we initiate a ministry, we do the ministry. One of the pieces that often falls off the plate is the evaluation. Like you plan your ministry, you get your leaders involved, you execute it, and it stops there. The last step should be evaluating. What did we learn about this? What could we do better? What should we do differently? So I think that that's another miss in a lot of ministry kinds of things, that we simply do not build in that whole thing of, we got to evaluate.
That's good. That's good. Um, can we back up a little bit, because I think you really hit on something that that I know for myself is a constant area that I need to work on when it comes to, developing this culture of honest feedback. And when it comes to, just because people don't like the idea don't mean they don't like you, right?
Yeah.
And developing that culture. And so what do you think? How do you help leaders to work through that, that emotional, spiritual, healthy individual part?
Yeah. Well, there's several components. Let's take a church setting. That's my setting. There's got to be a sense of safety, and there's got to be a sense of trust, that we really trust each other. There's a sense that we are all for each other, that we keep short accounts, that when there's an relational issue, we work to that issue quickly and early. And what I often do in my staff meetings, we'll have an idea, I'll throw it out, and I say, okay, guys, let's just, I use the term gray think. Gray think is a guy named Steve Samples, used to be the president of UCLA. Gray thinking is kind of like brainstorming, but it's basically, you share what you're thinking about. It's not the gospel. It has not been decided. So I will use that term. I'm just going to gray think right now with you. Like we were thinking through this possible sermon series idea. And some churches in the U.S. have done it where it's kind of like come to the movies, where you take movies and you kind of build messages off of that.
Yeah.
So we're thinking about our outreach series we do every January. So I said, guys, what about this idea? Somebody brought it up and said, what do you think about it? And there was some silence. So I thought, okay, people are processing it. And our youth pastor spoke up. They said, well, John, his name is John. John, what do you think? I said, well, I don't know. I feel this. And so it was like a different perspective. And I wrote it down. I said, well, thanks. That's good input to have. Mm-hmm. So I affirm people when they have a different perspective. I don't shut them down. I don't say, that's a stupid idea. Like that, gotcha. You're just being negative. So it creates this openness. Now they're going to follow. If I decide like we're going to do this series, they're going to follow because we have this trust level. Mm-hmm. But it's welcoming even contrarian views, welcoming different views, and affirming that. Now, one of the things we have an 8-point kind of list on a poster board, and we call it permission to play values. Like 8 things that we all expect all of our volunteers and all of our leaders. And one of those is that we are a learning environment. We're always going to learn. Learning comes from honest feedback. Learning comes from evaluating what we've done, whether good or bad. So that's part of our culture, that we're a learning environment. We don't really fail. We learn even in our technical failures.
Okay. I really like that. Permission to play, right? That's real good. It helps people to get into the mind. While this is serious, we're still going to enjoy this at the same time.
Right. If you want to play on our team, here's what we do. But also one of those is we're going to have fun. We're going to work hard, but we're going to have fun.
Awesome. So what are some of the things that, because one of the things we want to do in our community is encourage people to read and to learn. And I know you're an author, right? And I know you're always reading. So do you got some suggestions for our community, like some thoughts, books they can begin to read?
Yeah. I think one of the most seminal books ever written is a book by J. Oswald Sanders called Spiritual Leadership. It is I've read it probably 4 or 5 times. It is a foundational book every leader ought to read. In fact, our new board members, before somebody considers being on a board, they've got to read that book. That is really a crucial one. Another one, Pat Lencioni has written a lot of great books on leadership, and he's got one that kind of pulls all his fables together. It's called The Advantage. And so it's like a chapter on each one of his books. That's a good one. Another one, this is a secular book. It's called Failure of Nerve by Edwin Friedman, a Jewish author. And it's a heavy read, but it's a very, very good book. One more I'd recommend is one of my passions is intersecting cognitive neuroscience with spiritual formation and leadership. A book I wrote a couple of books ago is called Brain Savvy Leaders, The Science of Significant Ministry. And in that book, we look at how people process in their brain change, leadership, communication, and that'd be a good tool to use, understand how people's brains work when this whole area of leadership. So those are just a few I'd recommend.
Okay, awesome. All right, now, Brother Charles, you can't just glaze over that. So you said three things, right? This intersection, right? So it was spiritual formation, mental cognition. Get those again.
Okay, yes. So my passion is to intersect what's called cognitive neuroscience. Neuroscience is kind of like the brain. Cognitive neuroscience is cognition, what the brain is actually doing, the mind. So intersecting that with scripture and theology so that we learn how to do life and leadership better. Because God made this amazing 3-pound thing called the brain, and we're learning so much about it now. And what goes on in our brain, the function of our mind, profoundly impacts spiritual formation, profoundly impacts leadership, profoundly impacts communication, profoundly impacts how and when and why people will or won't follow your leadership. It's a lot of profound insight that we're learning from neuroscience now. And all truth is God's truth. Obviously, it falls under the scriptural truth. That's ultimate truth. But
Sure.
God created created science and math and engineering, and we can learn from it.
Oh, it's good stuff. Hey, I hope you were encouraged by that interview with Dr. Charles Stone. Listen, I know I was. Hey, make sure that you take time to connect with us on social media. We're on Facebook, Instagram, as well as on Twitter. And remember now, go over to my website, stephenowens.org, and sign up for that new newsletter and receive the free ebook, the free download, Rescuing Ambition. And finally, if you're interested in a leadership coach, I would love to be your coach. Let's see what we can do together to develop the gift that God has inside of you to lead well for the glory of Jesus. All right, till next time, thanks so much for tuning in. And remember, leaders must lead well. God bless you. Bye now.